Our next speaker is Dr. John Dernbach. John, I'll introduce you from here, if that's all right. Dr. Dernbach is probably a walking encyclopedia on the history of sustainability, not only in the United States, but in the world. He has been so active in this as someone who has been attending the most important meetings, contributing to the most important meetings, writing about this in ways that are always provocative and always very thoughtful. He is a professor, a distinguished professor of law at Widener University in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and co-director of Widener's Law Center. As you'll see, if you look through his the bio that we have for him, he has written extensively on this subject. And John, thank you so much for joining us and for adding your wisdom to the day.
Well, Bernie, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. It's really quite a pleasure to be here. As you can see, my job is to try and respond to the question, what does it mean to act as if tomorrow matters? And what impresses me about this conference, I've been to a lot of conferences, frankly, on sustainable development, environmental law, climate change over the years, but I do not recall ever being at a conference where the term wisdom or any variant of that was in the title. So often we talk about what's going on in environmental law and what we need to do with climate change and this or that technical issue, but we don't talk so often about wisdom and what wisdom actually means or what wisdom requires. And I am deeply, deeply honored to be here with the Salk family and the rest of you to honor his memory, his legacy, and what it represents by talking to you a little bit about what it means to act as if tomorrow matters. Now, we've been spending time talking about family, and since my father passed away, I've been thinking a lot about family history. These are my mother's parents. They were hardscrabble people. They never got past 8th grade. They knew war and poverty and unemployment firsthand. They raised 3 children, my mom, my Aunt Dorothy, and my Uncle Jim. And when they died, the funeral director said, well, you know, we can put a little extra something on the gravestone, and here's a list of quotations that we could put on the gravestone. That's the one they picked. And at the end of World War II, that was one of the very highest things you could say about anyone. Whether they sacrificed their life in battle or whether they worked hard for their kids. And I think on some level the challenge in front of us is what does it mean to give our today for the tomorrow of our children and our grandchildren? What does it mean to live so that future generations can live in abundance? Now, this is part of our inheritance. And it's not just the glorious environmental scenes that you can get that are emblematic of the national parks. It's your backyard, the county park, your front yard, any place really where wild things grow or are allowed to grow. All of it is part of our inheritance. Now, some of you, I bet, let me ask just a quick question. How many of you were not here this morning? Not here this morning. Okay, so some of you. How many of you are students? Okay, a decent number. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over some things that folks who are here this morning may have heard some variant of. But here's, for my entire life, there have been really 2 choices that people have been confronted with in terms of thinking about their relationship between development and the environment. And one choice is development first, okay? And then maybe a little bit of environmental protection here and there to sort of leaven it, okay? The other is environment first. And you hear that a lot from actually Earth First, right? There's an organization by that name that sort of puts the environment in front of everything else. And we've learned to think about these issues in either-or terms. It's either the environment or development. I mean, the number of times people have told me, well, you don't really want us all to live in caves, do you? Is too large to count. And what I want to suggest to you that is when we talk about sustainable development, what we're trying to do is articulate a third space, a space that needs a lot of work, a space that needs a lot of thinking, okay, and a space that needs a lot of enthusiasm, and that space is environment and development. Very few of us would give up the sort of the nice amenities we have. Very few of us would give up a roof over our head or warm food at night. And yet very few of us, I think, would give up clean air and pure water. And the question is, how do you make it all fit together? And because we're used to thinking in either-or terms, when we talk about both and, that can be kind of a hard thing to get our heads around. But what I want to suggest to you is that when we talk about sustainable development, that's what we're talking about. Now, I'm a career environmental law guy, and so I feel obliged to make a statement about the relationship between sustainable development and environmental law. We've had environmental law now in the United States in a very serious way since about 1969, 1970, and I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail on that. The basic idea is that what you need to do is impose basic minimum standards on certain kinds of behavior to ensure that there's a certain minimum quality of environment that basically everybody gets. That's the basic idea. So what you're doing is you're not really aiming for perfection. What you're aiming for is to prohibit or inhibit the worst behaviors. That's basically how environmental law works. What we're talking about here, and there's actually a movement underway. It's really quite extraordinary. There's a movement underway that is bigger and broader than environmental law. You heard Van Jones talking about it this morning. If you were here, you heard it at lunchtime. If you were here, all sorts of different places that I'm going to be telling you about, there's a kind of a broader movement that goes beyond compliance with environmental law. It exists within corporations. It exists within governments. It exists at the local level. It exists in colleges and universities. And it's bigger than, and it's broader than environmental regulation. And the interesting thing is it's not required by law. It's inspired by necessity and opportunity. So here's something that you've seen variants of, I think, also today. And it's for people who've been doing sustainable development for a long time, it's a fairly common picture to show, but I think it's worth a little bit of explanation. When I started out in doing environmental work, actually even in grade school, I was one of those kids that buried the gardens, the kitchen scraps in the backyard in the garden, okay? I've been doing this for a while now. And I'm thinking about the environment over there, and I'm not thinking about too much else. And there are a lot of people who do environmental work who sort of occupy that, the part of the domain that is just purely environmental. And there have been historically people who, and still are, sadly, who think nothing except about their business and about the economy. And they're not thinking about the environment, and they're not thinking about the social side. And there are people on the social side who aren't thinking about the economy or the environment. Each of the three circles has advocates who are basically anchored in that space and probably not so much in the space that joins them. When we talk about sustainable development, this is really not, absolutely, emphatically not another word for environmentalism, and it's absolutely not another word for green. When we talk about sustainable development, the core underlying concept is adding value in the little triangle in the middle, improving and protecting the environment at the same time as we build social well-being, at the same time as we build economies, all right, and build businesses. It's all of those three things together. That's what we're talking about. And what's happening in this movement, and you saw Van Jones talk about it in the most wonderful way this morning, because he said, as you recall, there were people that were interested in jobs, and there were people that were interested in solar energy, and those people weren't talking to each other. And so the movement that you're seeing is filling that space. How can we improve and protect the environment? How can we create jobs? How can we build the economy at the same time? So here are some takeaway messages. And so if you stop listening after this slide, you'll have gotten a fair bit of it. But I want you to get a sense of this. Okay, one is that the movement that you're seeing a lot of these days is it's bottom up. The prior panel, all right, a lot of that is bottom up. A lot of that is absolutely not required by law. It's particularly strong in some areas, and it creates opportunities for everyone. It creates opportunities for everyone. Everyone you heard speaking today was sitting in a chair just like this at some point in their 20s and heard someone just like me or just like Bernie or just like someone else saying things that are somewhat similar to what you're hearing now. And there are, trust me on this, there are lots and lots and lots of opportunities out there. Wherever you go, whatever you do, whatever you care about, whatever you're good at, there's an opportunity for you. And if we all do this, because we all need to do this, that's how we sustain our inheritance. We all have a role to play. We all have a role to play. It's that big a challenge. This is not one where you can say, well, you know, my friend is working on that and that's good, so whatever I do doesn't matter. No, we all have a role to play. So the ideas in my book, Acting as If Tomorrow Matters, came from about 50 people who are experts in different dimensions of sustainable development all across the country. And my idea was to ask them 4 questions. How have we done in the 20 years since the UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio in 1992, Rio de Janeiro in 1992? At that conference, countries all around the world endorsed the idea of sustainable development and endorsed a really ambitious plan to achieve it. So how have we done in the last 20 years in the United States? And why? You probably already know the answer. It's not so great, the progress we've made. But the second question is, why have we made any progress at all? This is a really important question because if we're going to make further progress, we need to have some idea of what has actually worked. The third question I asked is, what are the obstacles? That's easy. You could probably all write them down on a piece of paper right now, and they'll track pretty closely what you're going to hear from me. All right, but finally, and this is the key thing, all right, how do we overcome those obstacles and accelerate progress? The claim I make is what the book does is it provides an experience-based outline of how we can accelerate progress towards sustainable development in the next 5 and 10 and 20 years. It doesn't have all the ideas, but it sure has a structure that you can apply to pretty much everything that you work on. So what I'm going to do in the remainder of my time is I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainability. I'll talk about, and then the last 4 sections are basically going to track key findings from the book. How have we done in the last 20 years? Why have we made any progress at all? What are the obstacles? And how do we accelerate progress? And by the way, the thing to understand here, a really big thing to understand here, is that while we are talking about problems and while we're talking about very serious problems, we are also talking about opportunities. All right? We're also talking about opportunities. Well, now, when we get to sustainable development, this is the iconic definition of sustainable development. You can't go anywhere in the world of sustainable development, really, and not encounter this definition. And two things I'll share with you that are really interesting about this is it's very clear that it's about future generations, and it's really clear that it's about a particular form of development. But if you read it really carefully, you will not see the word environment or nature or anything like it. You've heard, right? You've heard pretty much all of this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. We're already in a lot of difficulty, and it looks like on a lot of these issues, things are just going to get harder and worse in the decades ahead. Now, what I want to share with you is an understanding of conventional development and sustainable development that I got from taking all the different texts apart that came out of the UN Conference on Environment and Development and subsequently. My thought was, instead of sort of disparaging the concept without reading any of it, I would see if I could read it and conceptualize it. And there's a lot in this slide, and because sustainable development comes from an international frame, I want to make sure that we're all a little bit together on this. And here's how it goes. At the end of World War II, Churchill and Roosevelt and the Allied leaders, and actually this is even before the end of World War II, they got together and they said, well, look, we're probably going to win this war. What do we want the world to look like after we win? And they said, well, okay, here's what we want. What we need is a set of international institutions that will accomplish three basic things. One is peace and security. All right, because if you've got tanks rolling up and down your streets, it's hard to do anything. All right, the United Nations is a response to that. The second is economic development. It was the really serious economic hard times that existed in Germany in the post-war era that led to that contributed to the rise of Hitler in Germany. So economic development matters a lot, and there are international institutions that are organized around that. The World Bank, which helped rebuild Europe at the end of the World War II, the International Monetary Fund to stabilize international currency, and I could go on and on. More recently, the World Trade Organization with the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. All right, all about economic development. And then the third thing we need, thinking about Nuremberg, all right, and everything that led to that, is we need a solid frame in human rights or social development. And there are international treaties that are organized around that too. Those three things put together constitute a pretty good understanding of what development is about on the international level. And I know for a lot of us, certainly me, you know, if you say, well, what does development mean? Well, I know what development means. Development is when you take that apple orchard where I used to go fooling around in the middle of the night as a kid, and you turn it into housing, right? That's what a development is. And that's how a lot of us understand that. But on the international level, where some of these ideas came from, development has a broader understanding. Now, at the end of World War II, no one was thinking very hard about the environment. And it's really hard to see in a lot of the treaties and agreements that were agreed to at the end of World War II that anybody was really paying much attention to that. And it doesn't, and even if you move domestically and you say, well, never mind all this international stuff, how does it work? Well, the way development often works is it's at the environment's expense. If you're downstream or downwind from the big factory or the big nasty shale gas development that you're unhappy about, or whatever it happens to be, what you get is that there's economic development and that jobs are being created, but that it's coming at the expense of the environment, and it's not just at the expense of the environment, because hardly anything that affects the environment because pretty much everything that affects the environment sooner or later hurts other people. So what happens is you've got living people who are hurt, you've got future generations who are hurt. And when I talk about conventional development in this way, I've got the headings progress and the price of progress over the top of it for a really important reason, because if you capture in a kind of common sense way how I think most people think about this issue, you'll conclude that the stuff on the left we all would say was progress. People are living longer, there hasn't been a third world war, we all like jobs, we get all that. And we all get on some level that the environment represents the price of progress, and that certain people are hurt along the way. Now, one really important thing to understand about this is, beyond sort of the justice implications of it and all of the rest, that what we're talking about when we're talking about development is we're talking about something in a conventional sense that both adds value and subtracts value at the same time. So if you ask the question about sort of maximizing the potential benefit to the human condition, and you say, how do we do that in the best way, having a system set up that both adds value and subtracts value at the same time cannot possibly be optimal. So what sustainable development does, aspires to do, is to take the environmental protection piece and the restoration piece and put that on the progress side. If we do this right, there is no more price of progress in the way that I was describing on the prior slide. What you get instead is we're adding a lot of value in what we do, and we're not subtracting value. And so what sustainable development aspires to do is to reconceptualize the relationship between humans and the environment, exactly the thing that Dr. Salk had talked about. And the thing that I want to say, though, is, well, this is fairly easy to explain, and I'll explain a little more in a bit. There's a really nice line from Naomi Klein's recent book that I think is worth sort of sharing with you. She says at one point, and this is her book, This Changes Everything, her book about climate change. I think probably some of you have seen it. She says at one point, building a livable world isn't rocket science. It's much, much harder than that. Okay? And I actually think that's true of what we're talking about here. Another way to frame sustainable development is to say, well, look, you know, when countries around the world got interested in this a long time ago, they were interested in two different kinds of problems. They were interested they were worried about large-scale environmental degradation, and they were worried about large-scale poverty. And they were worried that those two things reinforced each other, and they do. The poorest people in the world breathe the lousiest air and drink the worst water, and that's part of the reason they're the poorest people in the world. Those relationships are mutually reinforcing. And so you might say, well, sustainable development then is development that directly addresses the two problems it was sort of designed to solve, right? Is if you get rid of large-scale poverty and if you get rid of large-scale environmental degradation, you get sustainable development. But the thing also that I want you to see is that when we talk about sustainable development in this way, we are not talking about what some corporate people occasionally refer to as sustainable growth, meaning what they're interested in is profits increasing from quarter to quarter and year to year. We're not talking about that here. And we're not talking about sort of old-fashioned environmentalism, which might have been just about the environment and nothing else. It's a different frame. So one other thing about sustainable development that's worth understanding, and you heard this alluded to before, is when the Allied leaders, the folks from the UK and the US and elsewhere, were thinking about development in the post-war era, what they were interested in doing was unleashing human freedom, opportunity, and in improving quality of life. That was really what their orienting points were. And their idea was that if we create a structure that enables these things to happen, you won't see another world war. You won't see the kind of Great Depression that preceded it. And what's really interesting is that sustainable development captures that exact thinking. If we can make development and the environment work together, we provide greater opportunities for freedom and opportunity and quality of life, and not just for this generation, but for future generations. It's emphatically oriented toward human betterment. And the understanding, though, is that you can't do human betterment unless you protect and conserve the environment on which human well-being depends. That's the understanding that goes with that. Now, why should the U.S. care? There's a lot of reasons why the U.S. ought to care, but I'm just going to, from this slide, I'm just going to pick one. When an aging veteran stands on a platform, on a cemetery, on Memorial Day, or on the 4th of July, or on Veterans Day, and with gravestones all around talks about why he or she fought, that particular veteran will often talk about the people that he or she fought with. But that person will also say, I fought for freedom. When we talk about freedom and opportunity and quality of life, folks, we're talking about something that goes to the very core of what we care about as Americans. We're going to the very center of the things that we say are most dear to us. And what we're saying when we talk about sustainable development is we're saying that we need to proceed in this way in order to carry out and deliver on the values that we say we care about. Now, there's another piece to this that I've talked about a little bit before, and I want to cycle back to that. Very often in environmental world, we talk about parts per million and economic efficiency and energy intensity, and we use lots and lots of technical terminology and legal terminology to talk about what we're doing. But I think it's really important to understand when we talk about the environment, and especially when we talk about climate change, that we are really not just talking about the environment all by itself. It's impossible. It's virtually impossible to do anything really ugly to the environment without also hurting someone else at some point. And the people that folks in this room who've worked with environmental justice understand that a lot of people who are wind up really getting hurt are the poor and people of color. But here's something that's interesting. It's not just the poor and the people of color, although their problems are important and really important, and they're often hurt worse than anyone else. But understand this. There's a recent National Research Council report that basically says that even after 40 years of regulating coal combustion for air pollution control in the United States, thousands of people in the United States die prematurely. All right? And a lot of them are in the Midwest, and a lot of them are in the Ohio River Valley, right here. After 40 years of air pollution control, people are still dying prematurely from coal, of all colors, of all income groups. So, and I like this because I'm not even Catholic, but I like this. I like the stories about St. Francis. There he is preaching to the birds and the new pope. And I must say that it's not just the new pope that's making this point. Two friends and colleagues of mine, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, who are now at Yale, some years ago did a project on religion and the environment, and they collected basically material from every different major religion in the world. And they pulled it all together in a series that I think Harvard Press published. And the basic idea was to reinforce the notion that when we talk about religion and we talk about the environment, that there's a lot of overlap. And so whatever faith expression you do or don't have, understand this, that there's a piece of this that goes deep into the core of your traditions. Now, one last thing about understanding sustainability, and that is this. It's not enough to do a green building here and a green building there. It's not enough to ride your bike once a month, okay? And it's not enough that a couple of corporations or some number of corporations actually get this stuff, all right? Neil talked about the term scale. And what people in our world, when they talk about scale, what they mean is pretty much everybody does it, or it's done at a large scale. And unless what we get looks a whole lot like zero carbon or even negative carbon, all right, unless we make really serious progress toward that in the next several decades, unless we sort of honor in some deep way what you're hearing from a lot of people in the waste industry these days about moving towards zero waste, unless we really do this in a big, serious, ambitious way, the tensions that you're going to see around the world about this stuff are all just going to get harder and harder. The thing to understand is that what holds society together is a certain amount of stability, and a lot of the bad things that are happening to the environment are deeply destabilizing. And what happens in any given context might not be attributable just to population growth or just to climate change or just to this or just to that, but it all contributes. And as population grows, the potential for bad things and destabilizing things to happen just keeps getting bigger and bigger. All right, so a little bit about what the U.S. has done that's my take on sustainable development. Just a few things on what the U.S. has done. One is there are actual pockets of real efforts where there's an incredible amount of very, very, very good activity going on. Surprisingly, to some of my friends who grew up with the environmental movement in the late 60s and early 70s, which had a very strong anti-corporate edge, the corporate folks are some of the best folks. The corporate folks are absolutely some of the best folks on the environment. Now, some of you are saying, hey, I come from shale gas country, you're just full of cookies or something else, right? And I'll tell you that not all corporations get it. Some of the shale gas corporations get it better than others. But I'm not talking just about the shale gas companies, and I'm not talking about the oil companies. I'm talking about all companies. And a lot of them tend to be consumer products companies. I think that's whether it's healthcare or consumer products like what Dow does or whatever. Those are places where you're particularly seeing it. But the corporate sustainability is for real, and there's a lot of very, very good activity going on. Higher education is another one. I'm going to say some nice things about Pitt in a few minutes. But at the same time, our environmental footprint has increased. And the climate change issue just looks uglier and uglier as time passes. Now, some years ago, I had an opportunity to work with 18 prominent climate scientists when the case called Massachusetts versus EPA was coming up before the U.S. Supreme Court. And we wrote an amicus brief to the Supreme Court. I was part of the legal team. And one summer day, we're having a conference call. There's a fellow named Steve Wofsy, who's an atmospheric chemist at Harvard. And on the conference call, Steve says, well, you know, I'm a pretty skeptical guy, but Mother Nature's just not behaving like she should. And the call went from point to point, as conference calls often do. And at some point I said, wait a minute, let's go back to what Steve said. Is there some way we can capture that in the brief? All right? Is there some way we can capture that in the brief? The brief we filed begins, very close to the beginning, you see these sentences. And the thing to take in, this is the summer of 2006. We're about 8 years off from that now, all right? But you can see that what's going on here and this is, by the way, these are not like all the scientists from central Pennsylvania, all right? This is Jim Hansen. This is two folks who have won Nobel Prizes. This is all kinds of folks who are in the National Research Council, the National Academy of Sciences. This is a very, very good group, a very prestigious group of scientists. And this is what they say. And then they added this. Now, here's what it looks like. You've seen different curves all day today and little different charts. This is all measured out in degrees centigrade. But the thing that I want you to take a look at is take a look at the spike between about 1980 and up toward 2000 and beyond. This is measured in centigrade, all right? And so that for those of you who are not so scientific, the rough calculation here is that 2 degrees centigrade equals about 1 degree Fahrenheit. And what you can see if you look at this is that average surface temperatures all around the world, land and ocean, have increased by about a little more than 1 degree Fahrenheit since those of you who were born in 1980 were born. Okay? For the students in the room, a lot of this has all happened in your lifetime. That's the kind of increase that we're seeing. Now think about this from generation to generation, hundreds and thousands of years hence. This is not quite how you want temperatures to keep increasing. And so here's what the scientists concluded. Now this was really powerful for me because I've been reading the climate change science. But to me, there was a real sense of urgency in these sentences that I really hadn't gotten in a lot of the scientific papers that I had read. And the one thing that I should add is I'm pretty convinced, for reasons that we could talk about when this is over, if you like, is that the brief helped influence the court's decision. So All right, so why are we making any progress at all? Why are we making any progress at all? Well, you've seen the data today about polling, and I don't have too much to add to the polling data. It's pretty mixed. But in spite of the polling, what you're seeing happening is a lot of people are working on these issues where they are, doing very cool things for non-governmental organizations. You're seeing all sorts of public-private partnerships on this. You're seeing lots of really, really interesting market pressure moving toward greater sustainability. And as I said, the reason the drivers for sustainability are so important is they begin to give us clues about how to amp up the activity that we're doing and how to make more progress on it. Now, the business and industry piece, I think, is particularly interesting. You've heard about corporate sustainability reporting, voluntary performance commitments by different companies. But let me add to you another dimension to this. For years and years, there was a fellow named Ray Anderson who ran a carpet company in Atlanta. And this is a carpet company that made what they call modular carpet tiles. The basic idea was you have a carpet tile, you put down carpet tiles in an office or business or government setting, and then the carpet tiles wear out, and the company sells you new carpet tiles. Well, he read a book that made him think that if he kept doing business as usual, okay, he would be one of the people who would be known for having despoiled the environment. And it made a really big difference to him. And he decided that his company was not going to do that. And so they developed a different business model for moral and ethical reasons, as well as business reasons. And the different business model is, we will take your carpet tile when it's done, and we will replace it with another carpet tile, but we're not selling you carpet tile, we are renting it. All right, and we're going to take the carpet tile that's all beat up and so forth and not usable anymore, and we're going to take it back and reuse and recycle it. And the money and the energy and the water that the company saved were extraordinary. And so what you see in this example, and you see this a lot, is a combination of seeing, well, sort of, there's something else going on here beyond sort of the bottom line. And a lot of people, particularly when they think about their kids, get really motivated to move in this particular direction. A second reason you're seeing progress is more sustainable decisions are easier to make and they're more attractive. And there are lots and lots of examples of that. You want to buy a Prius? Hey, they're available now. Prius isn't a 100-mile-an-hour car, but it's better than the cars used to be. A lot of these alternatives are more attractive. One of the things that I think has really hurt sustainability and the environment stuff generally over the years is you pay more for it, and it doesn't taste as good, it doesn't last as long, it doesn't work as well, right? And as long as sustainable development alternatives fit that category, it's always going to be a minority thing. It's going to be a niche business. But what's happening now is people are saying, well, look, they're building products that really work. They're building products that really deliver. There was a question about green building earlier, and it gives me a way of providing an example. There is now a green building certification program. If you want to do green building, you don't have to go out and figure out, wow, what does sustainability mean? You don't have to do that anymore because there's something you can go to and just follow the script. And what's interesting about the green building thing, and one of the things that makes it more attractive, is when you do integrated design, you get better results. And so you take a building and you make it much more efficient. You insulate the daylights out of it, okay, the walls and the roof and the windows. And if you do that and you do all your design, and all the design people are working together, you need a smaller heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system because you're not getting as many leaks and you don't have to move as much air around. And so the extra cost of the insulation gets offset by the reduced cost of the HVAC system to the point where people who know what they're doing, and not everyone does, it's interesting the extent to which contractors who don't know anything about green building blow it off. All right, but the contractors who know something about green building and who've been down this road before can come in, even at a base price, pretty close to the price you'd get with business as usual. When you get those kinds of alternatives being more attractive, more and more people are going to employ them. Now, here's an example of taking some of those practices and sort of putting it on steroids, all right? They've done some things, and this is like, what, a 10-minute walk from here, right? This is one of the coolest places in town, and if you haven't been here, especially if you're a student, oh my God, solve that problem this weekend, okay? This is one of the coolest places in town. These folks have got more certifications. They're moving toward just about zero water use, just about zero energy use. And they are employing the environment in ways that, that move in a sustainable direction that really there aren't too many places like this in the country that are better than what they're doing right here. Now, in higher education, generally what you're seeing is a whole set of best practices that are being employed across the whole range of higher education activity. And what you're seeing is, you know, the thing that everybody gets, and you heard about it this morning from your chancellor, I believe, is you've got all sorts of green buildings here, all right? And that's a fairly easy and visible thing to do. But what happens is green building in higher education involves all of these domains. And what's really interesting, I think, if you look at all of these different domains, is you'll see a lot of very cool stuff that's being done at Pitt that tracks each of those domains. And when you go out to Pitt's website, and of course, if you haven't done this already, you should, especially if you're a student here, Pitt and sustainability. It's easy. There's a ton of stuff, okay? What you'll see is a boatload of activity that's occurring across, okay, all 7 of these domains here at Pitt. And part of the reason it's happening is that you've got a group of folks, Pitt isn't reinventing everything. Pitt's borrowing from other people. And in turn, these people are borrowing from Pitt. And then people are competing with each other or working together to figure out new and better ideas. And you're getting this self-regenerating, self-generating set of ideas within places like higher education that push sustainability to more and more sophisticated levels and to more and more real-world progress. Now, here's something that's really interesting. I saw this in Green Report of Historically Black Colleges and Universities. And it makes a point about values that I think is just hugely important. Is in the middle of their whole report, they say, well, look, this isn't just something you do. This is about who you are. And I think on some level, if we think about sustainability in terms of values and wisdom, and we think about wherever we go, whatever we do, working toward that as sort of not just what we do, but part of who we are, I think that's a really useful insight. All right, one other thing that has happened in terms of progress towards sustainability, and this is sort of the law part of me coming out, and I get that this is probably not even, in small ways, maybe not even a law audience, but it's worth saying is for a long time we've thought about making progress on the environment in terms of environmental law and having regulation. Environmental regulation. But what's happening, I think you'll see more and more and more, is you're seeing economic development laws or energy laws or other laws that have as a significant component economic development. And so when you see in Pennsylvania, for example, an obligation that utilities have to provide a growing fraction of their electricity from renewable energy sources, when you see the federal government adopt a program for certification of organic food. When you see governments like the state of Pennsylvania during the Rendell administration going to Spain and encouraging a Spanish wind turbine manufacturer, Gamesa, to bring its headquarters to Pennsylvania using old-fashioned economic development tools, all right, like loans and job training and all the different things that go into the historic economic development program. And you begin to see that for the environment, renewable energy, and for clean energy. And so in the field of law, where a lot of people say, well, we're really stuck, we haven't had a major climate change law at the federal level, and I get all that, okay, but at the state and local level in particular, you're seeing a lot of this kind of thing going on, all right? Obstacles. This is easy. You already know most of this, but I'll just say a couple things anyway, because I think it's important to identify what the obstacles are. Okay, one is very few of us start out the day saying, how can I screw the environment today? Okay, very few of us start the day with that perspective, okay? I'm not one who people say, oh, well, humans are always going to wreck the environment. Well, I don't know that. I'm not sure about that. I think what happens is there's a set of habits that we all follow, and we do them without thinking much of the time, because that's what habits mean. There are good habits and there are other habits, okay? But this is what we do. And in order to change something from, to push something in a more sustainable direction, we have to get out of we have to learn something about the new thing. We have to figure out how much it's going to cost. And it doesn't really matter too much, okay, whether it's me figuring out whether to switch out all the CFLs in my house for LED lights, because now I guess they're better, right? Or whether it's Neil Hawkins trying to figure out whether to replace an adhesive that his company sells with another adhesive that might be better, okay? Whatever it is you're doing, you've got to learn something, you've got to figure it out, okay? And it takes time and energy, and that's an obstacle. Now, there's also a little bit of social pressure here too, and on the personal level. Just out of curiosity, by the way, how many of you agree with that statement? How many of you don't agree? Okay, some agree, some don't agree. Most of you are sitting in the weeds. Okay. But anyway, that's I think, part of it as well. Another slice of reality here is to say that law and governance is unsupportive is probably an understatement. What you have here is there's several different things going on. Some of them have been alluded to already, and you probably already heard. There's the subsidies for the oil and gas industry are very large. The subsidies for renewable energy and energy efficiency and so forth are pretty small. And we actually, in spite of all the rhetoric about government and too much government and all of on the environment, a lot of the law that exists on sustainable development could be accurately called the law of unsustainable development, because it encourages the wrong things. There is no free market on the environment right now. It's heavily tilted against the sustainable stuff over and over and over again in large ways and small. The bipartisan consensus, business and governance failures, it's almost like, I think you already know that. For a lot of people, a lot of my Republican friends, to even mention the environment is to go to a place that they don't want to go to and you don't want them to go to. Because it's just toxic. And the crazy thing about this is that when I started out doing this work 20 years ago, my idea was, let's see, sustainable development is about four things. There's the environment and the social side. Democrats like that. Then there's the economic and the security side. Republicans like that. Okay? I worked in government for 15 years. I spent a lot of my time trying to figure out how to make environmental law work for business, to create jobs and all of the rest. I helped draft Pennsylvania's recycling law, which has created lots of jobs and which has kept lots of stuff out of landfills and has some impact on greenhouse gas emissions. I walk into this with some experience and on the government side thinking, well, look, this is in the middle, there ought to be a place for this. And then a lot of my government experience was if you can reach the middle 60 to 70% of the people, that's plenty good, because there's going to be people on the far left and people on the far right that you'll never get to. But with sustainable development, you ought to be able to bring in the middle 60 to 70%. Well, maybe not. Okay? Maybe not. So, and it's not just governance failures, it's just outright political opposition. And one of the really interesting things going on, and a very, very large challenge, is most of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, the increase in greenhouse gas emissions in the world in the next several decades is going to come from China, India, Indonesia, and places like that. All right? And these are countries, the Indian leader made a statement recently that basically said, look, our first priority is poverty reduction, and, and you get a lot of that. Okay? You get a lot of that. So, how do we accelerate progress and overcome opportunities? One, this is the free market piece in a way, okay? I think we need more and better choices. I think that's a starting point. And the interesting thing about a sustainable development frame is that it's not more choices that are less tasty, less appetizing, don't work as well, don't last as long, and all of the rest of that. I mean choices that really work for people. Choices that work for people, like the difference between personal computers and typewriters, like the difference between the black rotary telephone that some of us grew up with and this beast, okay, which can do more things than, I don't know, probably a computer the size of this room could do 40 years ago. We need really attractive alternatives because we're not going to regulate our way there. And I say that as a career lawyer, right? I teach law. It has a role. But if we're going to rely on law alone or coercion or regulation alone, we are not going to get to where we need to go. I spoke 2 years ago. I was on sabbatical at Cambridge University in the UK, and I had a wonderful meeting with Jake Reynolds, who works with business and policy leaders there. And he says, well, here's another way of saying what you just said, better defaults. And I think to some degree that's right. You know, the default program is the program we always use. And if we have to choose all the time from, going from the default program to a better program, well, a lot of us will get to that point. But if the defaults are actually better, then we're beginning to do this more and more at scale. And I like that. I think that's a fair point. We need to think about law more broadly than in terms of environmental regulation. All right? We need to think about how we can use law for economic development, use law to create jobs, and all of the rest of that. And we absolutely need to respond to climate change. One of the scariest things in the least readable paragraphs in the IPCC report that came out is the IPCC says, well, look, there's a carbon budget. If you really want to avoid big global problems, we've got to keep the increase in temperatures to about 2 degrees centigrade, about 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? And oh, by the way, we've already put most of the carbon in the air to do that. And we've only got a little bit left, maybe only a couple decades, maybe longer, depending on how you calculate it. But we don't have too much longer. And one of the things that really underscores the need to accelerate the transition to sustainability is this. All right, it's really hard to get carbon out of the air, carbon dioxide out of the air, once it's already there. Because it's not like sulfur dioxide or something where, it falls out of the air in a couple months or something. It stays there for decades, even centuries. So once it's there, it's likely to stay there, unless one of the young geniuses in the room comes up with something that can suck it out of the air and put it somewhere where we won't create earthquakes because there'll be so much weight from all the stored carbon. Okay? And that's important too, but we've really, really, really got to bear down on climate change, and we have got to find a way to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And here's the thing, okay, is we say, well, what about China and India? And China and India look at us and they say, well, okay, you've got the biggest economy in the world. You've got, of a developed country, I don't think there's anybody as a developed country, big developed country that's got a per capita income anywhere close to us. You've got world-class educational institutions. You've got a ton of money and lots of science and technology. And you're telling us that you won't go first? Really? Do you remember? You guys all see the Terminator movie at one point? Remember can you imagine the Terminator saying, hey kid, I'll go if you go with me? Right? That kind of thing doesn't happen. We have a leadership role to play. And if these other countries that see themselves in a more desperate situation in terms of fighting poverty see us sort of sitting in the weeds waiting for them to act, that's sending all the wrong signals about whether this is even doable. Disclosure and reporting are examples of things that can be done. Greenhouse gas reporting, for example, has been required for a little while now. On the corporate side, more complete disclosure, places where it would help consumers or investors. You see some of that. These are information-oriented, and they're oriented toward important audiences. These kinds of changes are not the type of non-regulatory changes that might help. I started out talking about wisdom, and I kind of have to come back to this, is we need some idea that we can all agree on what this country is about and where we're going. And it's going to be pretty hard, but I think we need to do it. At the end of World War II, we had a vision. We had an understanding of what we were about. And quite sadly, we don't have that now. We don't have a narrative that puts all the pieces together. The part of the narrative that I like the best is a World War II story about the Seabees. The Seabees were the amphibious naval engineers who sort of made the island hopping campaign across the Pacific during World War II possible. And I remember reading a book about the Seabees when I was a kid. And the story was, well, Lieutenant, somebody would ask one of the Seabees, well, can you build this amphibious bridge across this lagoon? It's about a quarter mile. It's about mid-afternoon now. Can you have it done by dawn tomorrow? And the answer was, can do, sir. Okay, can do. A spirit of being positive and optimistic. The sort of thing, frankly, okay, that Ronald Reagan exemplified, okay, the Morning in America stuff. And on both the Republican and the Democratic sides, we need the ability to sort of, we need the ability and the confidence to engage on this at scale. Now, I started out saying also that there's an American movement for sustainable development, and there is. And it's not just people with placards, and it's not just the folks who marched in New York a couple of weeks ago. I was one of them. It was really quite interesting. There were, like 30 blocks of people in New York, and that's certainly part of it. But there's a bigger thing going on, and the bigger thing going on is the folks in corporations, the folks who are doing local agriculture, the folks in colleges and universities, all right, who are working together, and everywhere else, the folks who are working together to make progress in real places because they believe in it, because it makes sense for their organizations, because it makes sense for their kids, wherever we are, whatever we do. So there is this movement, and it needs to be bigger, and it needs to include all of us. What we've seen so far gives us some ideas of what we can build on. And I will say that if the challenges are great, okay, so are the opportunities. So are the opportunities. And a story to close with. After we did the Green Building Project in my church some years ago, we did energy conservation and efficiency workshops for other religious organizations for a couple of years. And we brought in someone from Philadelphia to talk about that, named Andy Rudine. And Andy would start out by saying, and I don't remember anything else that Andy said. I really don't remember anything else that Andy said. But you know what he said? He said, I want to be a good ancestor. I want to be a good ancestor. And I wondered, until preparing for this event, where he got that from. Let us all be good ancestors. Thank you.
Two of you fight it out, so both of you.
Discussion there. Oh, hey, and I get amplification too. My question was about, you talked about changing our identity, changing who we are to a more sustainable frame, and also about changing the defaults for how we operate, and I wholeheartedly agree that really we should get ourselves to a place where this is just the way, that we do everything. And so my question to you is about, especially in light of regulation not getting us all the way there, if you thought there were policy or legal means by which that might be encouraged.
Well, I think the big mistake we can all make is to say that what's going on in Washington sort of stands for what's going on in the entire country, and it does not. There's a lot of really interesting stuff happening at the state level everywhere, There's a lot of interesting stuff happening at the local level everywhere. I'm teaching a class this fall at Widener where my students are drafting sustainability ordinances for the city of Harrisburg, which wants to see them in the worst way. And as some of you know, the city of Harrisburg has got more than a little distance to come. So my point is, on the legal side, I think there are opportunities, there are sort of policy opportunities in a lot at the state and local level. There are also, from a legal point of view, and I've been spending a fair bit of time with practicing lawyers on this, there's a lot of practicing lawyers who are sort of moving their clients in ways towards sustainability in ways that you wouldn't have guessed. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. I'm still sort of in the middle of collecting data, but a whole lot of it comes down to this. If you're a practicing lawyer and you understand something about sustainable development, you can give your clients advice that other lawyers just aren't going to be able to give them. And so that's another set of opportunities. You've asked a really big, really good question, and I'm giving you a really short answer in deference to what Bernie signaled. But
I just got a signal saying we had 5 minutes. So.
Oh, well, then, no, I'm not going to keep going. But we can, I'd be happy to continue that if you like.
Hello. My question kind of continues in that direction. You talked a great deal about freedom, and free markets have kind of defined our economy in this country. Almost we defend it to the death. But left to its own devices, it really just concentrates corporate greed and rewards it. Freedom without accountability, without responsibility, not only to your shareholders, but also to the next generation, is yielding chaos. And if you look at the regulatory apparatus associated with our balance between environment and development, you see that we've been putting stoppers in the smokestacks and titrating what drips out of the emission type pipes and lining landfills, and we have not got to the root problems where we regulate in order to control things at the source. Do you see any prospect of our regulatory framework moving to a system where we have controls at the emissions origin? So like instead of having carbon emissions controlled by what comes out the smokestack, to say we make energy by the least emitting mode possible, and you're going to make chemicals that by design don't require toxic alternative. You know, they're non-toxic by design. Can we go from a point of treating symptoms to addressing the root causes by regulation?
All right, I'm going to give you sort of two answers to that because they sort of capture sort of the both sides of my thinking on this. On the positive side, no. Should I start with the negative side or the positive side? Let's start with the negative side so we end on a positive note. On the negative side, I'm beginning to feel like as I get older, I'm beginning to feel, especially with the shale gas stuff, that over and over again, it's sort of like as the shale gas thing unfolds, to some degree, and I don't want to, shale gas in some ways is nothing as bad as coal mining was, okay? And I don't want to say that they're the same, but in some respects, I see shale gas as we've seen this movie before, okay? And if you go back in human history, okay, there are harbors in Asia Minor, what is now Turkey, that are now several miles inland because of all the erosion and sedimentation from agriculture. The story of humans doing bad things to the environment in the name of development is not a modern thing, all right? It goes way back. And at some point, and the whole point of environmental law, I should add, all right, is to limit the worst aspects of that, all right? And it's actually succeeded in really profound ways. If you spend any time outside in Pittsburgh today, it was a beautiful day, right? In the 1940s, at noon in Pittsburgh, I am told, all right, it was dark with smoke. If you wore a white shirt, you changed it at lunchtime because it was already gray. And so, you know, in much of the developing world, the environment is in a horrible place. So, I mean, I guess I've moved from the negative to the positive. I think the way this really works is is I get your endpoints. I absolutely get your endpoints. Part of when I talk about human quality of life, freedom and opportunity, I don't mean that this side of the room gets freedom and opportunity, and that's good enough if the other side doesn't. Okay, this is freedom and opportunity for everyone. This is quality of life for everyone. But the challenge we have is we're in one place and we want to move to another place, and it's really hard to do that in one step. And so we move a little bit in one step, and then we push back, and then we move a little bit more, and then, and that's sort of the world that we're in. And we need to figure out a way to speed it up. Okay, so it's a hard question, and it's a very good question.
Okay, and we have one more question. I hope it's a short one with a short answer because
I got it.
we're ready to go. We've already lost our break, folks. Sorry. But
I'm in trouble already.
questions and answers are more important than a break.
Yeah. One thing I haven't heard about today, in spite of all the progress that we have made through institutions, through government, through corporations, through educational institutions and so forth, is the lack of attention to the individual. And I think that's the weak link in this whole chain, and the thing that kind of depresses me, because back during the Second World War, my parents saw trucks come through the neighborhood that collected cloth to make rags that were recycled. And when I worked at Xerox Corporation in the 1980s in research, one of our goals was the paperless society, and we all see how that has gone. Everybody wants to store things and print it out. You store it on carbon, or on silicon, but then you also make a carbon copy. So, and then today's young people, a lot of good has been said about them today. However, if you come down to the south side where I live, you will see the streets littered with cigarette butts and paper and cans and bottles and so forth. And it just seems to me that until the individuals buy into this idea of sustainability and nurturing the environment, we're not going to get anywhere. I mean, this can't be a top-down thing. I mean, I saw a statement about bottom-up, but it seems to me that this is really top-down. Organizations of the sorts that I mentioned, and frankly, I'm a little bit discouraged by it. And I wonder if you could comment on that. How do we get at the individual?
The whole bottom-up thing is emphatically driven by individuals. Corporations are doing what they're doing in response to individuals. Those are the consumer products companies. The higher education is doing what they're doing because students coming to schools, individual students coming to schools, want this. And I could give you like 10 more examples, but I can't. But trust me, there are 10 more examples. Okay? I'll be happy to talk to you about it. All right?
John, thank you very, very, very much for this superb presentation.